Howdy, folks. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am the redneck, and you bet I've gone green, and I'm trying to get you to do it too. And as a reminder on this program, when we talk about going green, we ain't talking about mere environmentalism. We talking about something deeper. We talking about deep ecology, the interconnectedness of all of life. And whether you come at that from a hard science Western perspective, or you come at it from a deeply feminist eco-spiritual perspective, or like me, you say those are both perfectly valid ways of understanding the reality of the world, I'm here to tell you that we are all connected in this web of life, and whatever we as humans do to that web, we are ultimately doing to ourselves. And y'all, we got to be honest, we doing it wrong. We're literally commodifying Mother Earth faster than she can replenish herself. And as if that ain't bad enough, and that's pretty damn horrible, we are also creating a racist, sexist, and class oppressive world order with the plunder and pillage of Mother Earth. And that's why here on Redneck Gone Green, we bring you voices of people who ain't just talking about it, but actually doing something about it. And it is with that I am really excited about this show. And let's now bring in our good friend and co-host, Shane Knight. Hey, Shane, how you doing, brother?
For Monday, I'm doing pretty good, David. How about yourself?
You know, same. And I got to say, these days, Shane, I always have to separate, right? How am I doing? Well, on a personal level, man, I'm as happy as a pig in shit. I've got a great relationship with my junior high school sweetheart. We reconnected 13 years ago. As you know, Governor Peanut Butter, I got a dog that gets me out walking every day. I do meaningful, productive work. Every box is checked.
There you go, my friend.
But I'm living in some existential dread right now, right? The ecological collapse is accelerating. Fascism, explicit, clear, unambiguous, is literally organizing the entire society, not just in the U.S., but across the globe. Brah, we are in trouble.
Yeah, we are. Especially after this past week of news.
Man, look, go, hit it.
I don't even know where to get started. I mean, everything from the feds infiltrating the Fulton County courtroom or courthouse to pick up those ballots. I don't even know what to say about that. I mean, it doesn't come as a surprise, but at the same time, it's just another sign that, hey, one group of us is playing by the rules and the other one just doesn't give a shit.
Well, that's right. And I, honestly, like, look, there is the assault on the electoral process there in Fulton County, Georgia. There's the arrest of Don Lemon and Georgia Ford. There are the ICE raids that are absolutely positively horrific. And there's a general strike that is moving forward. And you know what, Shane? Usually you and I banter a little bit, but our guest this week, man, he is perfectly positioned to talk about all this and more, not just to criticize it, but to answer the existential question, what is to be done? Y'all, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Joshua Dedmond to Redneck Gone Green. Joshua is like us, Shane, a Southern boy through and through. He is also a longtime labor organizer. He's an environmental activist. He is also a personal friend. He's the executive director of the Labor Network for Sustainability. Joshua, welcome to Redneck Gone Green.
Thank you. Thank you so much, David. Thank you, Shane. Ruthie, thank you too. It is my distinct honor and pleasure just to sit back and shoot the breeze with y'all on this evening where I am and this afternoon over on the West Coast. So I'm grateful for this opportunity. And there was just so much illuminated in you all's opening. David, I appreciate as a Black Southerner the idea of starting with joy. Like in my old church tradition, they'll say, out of all the things I've been through, I still have joy, and I think that joy and love are still the key proponents and attributes of what is to be done. this radical notion of love, but not absent, like not this, distant love that is just makes you feel good or anything like that, but love that calls you to uh, a prominent responsibility of taking care of yourself and the ones around you, your locale. And so you started with that type of joy and moved into this responsibility of this moment, of this political moment, this socioeconomic moment, this rise of authoritarianism. And if we don't start practicing that love and moving our boots and moving our asses, then we just may be in the dystopian future that we fear.
Oh my goodness, Shane! I told you was going to like Joshua Dedmond, didn't I?
And you mentioned two other things, David. This interconnectedness. I mean, we could talk about King's letter from Birmingham City Jail and the inextricable network of all mankind. I want to pause to just say, it's just like Duran Bernard said yesterday at the Grammys. Happy Black History Month for the rest of my life. And so I want to and you illuminated, David, just in your opening, the idea of these radical practices, the eco-feminist, eco-socialist lens that can be developed in this age where a whole bunch of contradictions are being called to the floor. All contradictions are being called to the floor. Generations are questioning what the hell is going on. What was my expectation? And Shane, you mentioned that some of us are playing by the rules, and some of us it's just a no hold barred, Dusty Rhodes, Ric Flair cage of death. And, and and Dusty was the working class, like the American dream. So I think that there's all of these things that are compounding in this moment. But what we have to do is that idea of radical love, that idea of love that challenges authority, that not doesn't go along to get along, but really challenges and produces. And I think that is rooted in first, and David and everybody knows, I start my iteration and how I arrive in movement through the Black liberation struggle. And all things are Black, all things are Black and queer, and this strangeness, this uniqueness that sets us into this moment is really what we have to do. And so I'm just here to help poke the bear, fortify some folk, and really one thing that is certain is whatever stance we are moving in. I was talking on a staff call the other day with Jeremy Brecker. We be careful about revolution, and CLR James will tell you the same thing. To be careful of how you pronounce revolution. Revolution doesn't play. So we might not have to say a revolutionary posture, but whatever radical posture we're taking, one thing we have to know is that we're gonna have to go that way together. We're gonna have to join hands and do that. So I come offering just that, my willingness to work with y'all and continue to move things to a positive, and to use the words of a great white man, towards the world we deserve.
now you're making me blush because, of course, for those who know, because Joshua and I are friends, that is in fact a tagline that I put on my emails. And thank you, Joshua. I'm gonna say it out loud. Yes, February is designated Black History Month to coincide with the birthday of Frederick Douglass, one of the great American political theorists and actors, to be sure. But let's emphasize that Black history is American history, that they are inextricably linked. And I'm going to now quote Shane Knight, who says, in moments like this, we got to run towards each other, right? And so I think, Joshua, you framed that out so beautifully. And what I want to do is take a moment to acknowledge how you entered the space, as an unapologetic Black liberationist and as somebody who comes out of liberation theology. Remember, like my papa or my grandfather was a Baptist preacher, right? Like, and so, Shane, I know you got a little of that in your background too. Hey, check it out,
A
Josh.
little bit.
Shane, why don't you introduce yourself to Joshua? Because two Mississippi boys ought to know each other.
That's right. That's right. See, my father was a Southern Baptist preacher, and I grew up mostly in Southwest rural Mississippi in a town called Roxy. It's
Okay.
near Bude, Meadville, east of Natchez by about 35 miles. Went to high school actually in Kosciuszko, Mississippi.
Wow.
Was dead center of the state. But yeah, my father was a Southern Baptist preacher and was sort of ostracized from the community because he liked Black folk.
That'll do it in Mississippi.
Yeah.
Well, look, and Joshua, again, I gave just a teensy bit. I'm going to invite you to introduce yourself to the Redneck Gone Green audience, because you really do have an amazing history and trajectory. So just like I got Shane to introduce himself to you, I'm going to invite you to introduce yourself not only to Shane, but to the Redneck Gone Green audience.
Well, I appreciate that again, Shane. I'm Joshua Dedmond. I use he, him pronouns. I am from the great capital city of Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi, also known as Eversville, if for those who are familiar with the Jackson Kush Plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I am oriented through the legacy of Black institutions first that have been sustained by poor Black folk in Jackson, Mississippi, always under the threat of a lack of resource, but always with that little bit of nothing, they've turned and made a mighty nation. My great grandfather pastored 10 churches, and they pastored 10 churches from the central Mississippi area, from the Tougaloo area all the way up to Vaden, a little bit past Kosciuszko. So 10 churches in over his lifetime, not at one time, but this is back when Black institutions like the Black church could meet, once a month or so, or for everyone's sake, most churches would meet either first or third or second or fourth. My father pastored in Jackson, in Yazoo City, and then a little bit of scandal, but folks are human. And my mother is a 42-year decorated nurse of the Jackson VA hospital system. And so she was also, out of those Black institutions, 2 high schools, one named after the Black Secretary of State of Mississippi, Jim Hill, Secretary of Education, Jim Hill, and then the other, Lanier High School. My mother went to Lanier High School. There's this great and lasting alumni presence of Lanier High School. So many Black folks went there. And so she comes out of Lanier. She was the first set of students to mandatory desegregate Murrah High School. And so if you know anything about Jackson, if you know anything about Mississippi, the rule for desegregation came federally in 1954. It took 16 years for Jackson to catch hold, for Mississippi to catch hold to that. And so in the spring of 1970, they displaced students who had gone to Black high schools for Black schools for all of their education career, and then did the courageous thing to put them over into schools with white folks. So my mom does not claim Murrah High School. I do, but I'm the class of 2005. She claims Lanier High School. And so it's and in that vestige, continuing in Black institutions, I went to Tougaloo College, founded in 1869 by the American Missionary Association, on the Bodie plantation. Black folks, again, taking a little bit and still moving within the confines of how to love themselves and how to love the land and cultivate freedom for themselves. Because freedom ain't nothing that just comes by osmosis, nor does it come by lip service. It comes by real work and hard work. And so I'm proud to be in that lineage. And I started preaching at 14. So by
Ooh.
so I was one of those childhood Holy Ghost anomalies. Uh, y'all know about the Holy Ghost, and at some point, the Black fundamentalist church that I went to did not satiate my spirit. It did not satiate my desires. I could no longer go to a place that would hold up. Are you all familiar with Oral Roberts? I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
I could not.
Unfortunately.
I could not stay at a Black space that was holding up the idea of expect a miracle. Because look, we'll be still looking in the sky, expecting something to happen. We should be working and believing that old man Lowe will be with us always. If you all could tell, like the scriptural adages still mean a lot to me in this revolutionary posture, but regardless of that, speeding it up, I had an opportunity to get organizing chops under the NAACP of the state of Mississippi in one voice. If you know folks out that way, Derek Johnson did an excellent job. Nashambi Lambright, shout outs to all of these folks who have made a way for me. And then I got hooked up with the UAW in 2011 under the leadership of Sanchione Butler. I'm gonna call these names because I believe in not just waiting to folks like the ancestors, but I believe in calling folks for the radical work that they do now and in this moment. And so Sanchione Butler, a Black woman who led a real fight against not just the empire of Nissan, but also the state of Mississippi, and really pressed Carlos Ghosn's neck. Who didn't win the union, but sure did change a lot of minds and hearts in the state of Mississippi, and that is important work as well. And David wrote about it. I've bounced around organizing spaces, primarily unions, CWA. I had an opportunity to organize state employees and really get an understanding of the state, as stretching as far from Natchez as all the way up to Tupelo, and everything in between. The state of Mississippi still doesn't recognize or give a contract to that union, but the city of Jackson does. So we take our wins where we have them. And then I moved into labor adjacent work. For some time, I was the national organizer for U.S. Labor Against the War, tying labor and demilitarization and those efforts. Shout out to Reese Cheneau, but also shout out to some old white men that I don't think would mind calling them old white men. John Braxton, Mike Zweig, some really good people along the way. Michael Eisinger and others. Michael Eisinger out on the Bay Area as well. And so then I had an opportunity to come into the Labor Network for Sustainability, building First Our Young Worker Project, and it blossoming into not with just myself, but with our first organizing committees of committed folk out of a few different unions, committed young folk who really wanted to one, cultivate their leadership in labor, but also stick their necks out to push labor to recognize the need for climate and environmental justice. And and LNS was started by Joe Uline, who was the industrial area's vice president for the AFL-CIO, and just a great and awesome guy to know, as well as Jeremy Brecker, who, of course, has contributed what I think is a holy text to the movement, which is so yeah. Here I am now in the position to lead LNS, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. I'm grateful for those who've come before me and the struggle, the principal struggle we've had in this space as we know the notion that labor is usually pale, male, and stale, but the commitment to hear people of color, to hear frontline communities, and to bring with vigor the need for labor and environmental justice to move in lockstep, concert, and hand in hand. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Well, Joshua, again, thank you so much. I have never regretted asking somebody to share a little bit about who they are and why they do what they do. So I really appreciate you. You know, I consider you a dear and cherished friend and comrade. And so knowing that you come out of both liberation theology and a Black radical tradition, and literally grew up in the heart of the Neo Confederacy, right? Like the fact
Mm-hmm.
that you were able to name all of those things and still get going, I just really appreciate you. And I appreciate the fact that you are now as the executive director of the Labor Network for Sustainability, because it occupies a very critical place in this conjuncture or in this historic legacy. Because, as I said in my Substack, and by the way, Joshua, like that essay that I wrote, it's gotten a lot of play, and a lot of folks have already written to me privately about that essay. So, you know, I set the bar pretty high for you, right? So what I want to ask you to do is, because y'all got multiple projects that you got going on, right?
Mhm.
And of course there is ICE, there's a general strike, but I also don't want to let just the reaction to these fascist a-holes drive this conversation. So
Yeah.
I want to actually ask you, in the context of this program, Joshua Dedmond, Executive Director of the Labor Network for Sustainability, what is it that y'all are doing that you want to share with the Redneck Gone Green audience?
Well, I appreciate that question. First, it is Transit Equity Week, and I'll start with it, that area of programming for LNS. It is on February 4th. We'll recognize Transit Equity Day. LNS it has a historic partnership with Trust Transit Riders in the United States. And the National Campaign for Transit Justice and other spaces to really craft and build more traction towards Transit Equity Day, recognizing Transit Equity Day is on Rosa Parks' birthday, February 4th, and really wanting to build this notion that equitable and fair accessibility to transit is a needed thing for so many reasons. But the more we build mass public transit, we make a step in the right direction to decrease emissions, to also build infrastructure for people who need to get to work. And the notion that we have at LNS, the tagline that we have the most is making a living on a living planet. And
Mm.
so it is our hope to create spaces by which we can continue to tease out. And as you wrote, David, in your essay, for so often we have pitted labor against environmental justice. You can't work and have a living planet. You either work until the death of the planet and work to your death, um, or you know can frolic in in the fields and in the pastures of green and have a living planet, but you'll be dead broke. And so that is how the narrative goes so far. But at LNS, we challenge that we challenge that notion, knowing that we could work for first, as you again mentioned in your essay. Your essay summed up all of my point from Tony Mazaki's idea of a just transition first, and I appreciate your laying a just transition, not just with Mazaki, but also predating Mazaki and understanding South African struggles, moving out of
Mm.
mines, moving out of extractive industry, and how do we actually build a regenerative planet? I'm going to call on a couple of names throughout this moment. I want to call on the name of Norman Rogers, who's the vice president of USW 675 out in Los Angeles, who says that, we are trying to get workers to see the horizon, and folks can vision the horizon, this big, vast horizon, and they realize it's a fucking cliff. And what we're doing at LNS is crafting the notion that we have steps down into what is an actual just transition. So not only do we amplify Transit Equity Day, we've worked with now the Sunrise Project. I got a report that was due this past Saturday, but and a meeting this upcoming week on how do we shift in transportation these idle giants to move out of extraction into a more plausible concept of a just transition, challenging Daimler and Chrysler, and how do we challenge manufacturing unions, especially workers within the UAW. How do we challenge those spaces to make an accurate transition in those spaces? We have sweet spot unions all the way to the difficult task of the building trades. And the difficult task in the building trades is getting the trades to realize that we can build anything on the planet. Can we build what will sustain us? And so actualizing that transition, but we realize that is easier said than done. And what we need to do is deep relational work. Building deep relationships within the EJ movement, within the climate movements, within the big greens, from the Sierra Clubs to Greenpeace, all the way to the frontline communities. I have the privilege to be on the board for the Climate Justice Alliance, and we understand that climate justice is fraught now with the challenge that the state has said that climate workers are Antifa. And so
Can I just take a moment to just say, remember, y'all, Antifa stands for anti-fascism, and I thought we were all anti-fascist in the U.S. You know what I'm saying? Like, did we have a world war over that?
It's funny. Everything is laced in contradictions. Jim Crow, which is a very U.S. thing, a very U.S. Southern thing, is the inspiration of Nazi Germany, and Nazi Germany at this point is the inspo and the infographic for the present age we're living in, and so
I will say this too, Joshua. I'm here to say, as a proud Southerner, that the lack of not punishing the Confederacy is part of what we're dealing with now, right? And I mean that as a proud white. I got the pigment I have, but I'm here to say that those traitorous bastards were not properly punished, and the culture, and if the Reconstruction had continued, before, like, we would be living in a different world today. That needs to be said.
I agree wholeheartedly, man. I've been saying the same thing for years. I don't understand why that war ended and they were allowed to erect monuments to very disturbing individuals that lasted. And still, if you go to Vicksburg, Mississippi, there's an entire fucking park dedicated to it, and they won't take it down. Not like what they did in Richmond down Monument Avenue a few years back when they tore those monuments down. It's still alive and well, and that whole mentality just persists generation after generation. And I'm sick and tired of it. I'm sick. I grew up thinking, one day I'm gonna outlive all these old racist bastards, and now I'm looking at their grandchildren going, nope.
Yeah. The granddaughter of the murderer of Goodwin, Cheney, and Schwerner, those valiant SNCC organizers during 1964, their granddaughter has the opportunity to be the in the governor's administration at the state level of Mississippi. And so, yeah, you don't really outlive it, especially you really can't outlive stuff that you've lived trying to hide, trying to wash under, as if these things came so easily, and to continue to whitewash, and take the the power out of the idea of struggle. And we mentioned Black liberation and liberation theology, David. Um, and one thing that is laced in Cohn's assertion is not a moment to forget and live past, but to live and accept that wound in such a way by which it becomes informative is some of the premise of liberation. And honestly, part of the challenge in the United States is not just the actualization of Black liberation and brown liberation and queer liberation and frontline communities, but it's the liberation of white folks from this notion that they got to have a level of power, and we even see it in leftist spaces. This notion sometimes that that my analysis is correct. And I remember the Black Panther silhouettes from Ivory Phillips, um, and who was the minister of 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 art for the Panthers. Um, and there's this silhouette of an old Black woman, and she has groceries by her feet. And she says, now that I have food, I can think about voting. And so there's just real physical and material reality that we have to start to assert together, or else we won't be able to undo or challenge properly, because there will still always be the notion that someone who is white can come into our spaces and be the authenticated voice. And so we got to challenge that. We got to challenge that in a way by which we're willing to live in front of each other, that we're willing to love each other in such a radical way that we can tell folks the truth, and not be rubbed or put off by it. And so yeah, like it's really hard to outlive these things when we talk about the Holy Ghost, the promised Paraclete. I will always interchange between if we're talking about theology or movement. But if we're talking about the Holy Ghost, like some of us need a soul revival, and that's what we're missing sometimes is this captivation of the soul that says, like, listen, I love these folks, I want to learn from them. This is the most profound organizing moment this nation has seen in history. I still feel is the 1960s Black Liberation Freedom Summer movement in the state of Mississippi, where young folks didn't come and say, "Oh, I got this great deal of analysis for you and I can solve this issue." It was now Fannie Lou made sure that you were going to sit, like Ella made sure that you were going to sit and learn and be with the people. And so and that's also something that we hope that we can achieve at LNS, is this real time spent in relationship work, where some of the mistakes of the labor movement moving into communities or pushing communities out or not listening to them can be partnered with frontline communities, partnered with frontline voices, and building more of an interconnectedness. The same for the big greens. If we can bring those relationships to the frontline level, and to realize this notion that most of us are frontline community folks, and frontline community folks are also frontline workers. These same folks who are living in these environments that living in Cancer Alley, these same folks are working not only in these facilities, in these liquid natural gas facilities, in these petrochemical facilities. Hell, they also working in the casinos in New Orleans, and so these are frontline folks who need to one have their leadership supported first, but also have the institutional support and the institutional power that comes with their voices being heard in their unions in those democratic spaces, and then those priorities being lifted. Too often, we see labor acquiescing to capital, and I think that is a challenge that we at LNS often challenge. It's not saying that folks don't want to make money and folks don't want good jobs. It is just making sure that labor is on the right side of the movement, and that's what we're hoping to do at LNS.
And as always, you pack a punch, Joshua. I do want to take this moment to lift up Ella Baker, who famously said, "Strong people don't need such strong leaders." That philosophy that emphasizes the grassroots empowerment and collective action and shared decentralized leadership being more effective than charismatic top-down authority. And again, I appreciate how you always consistently lift up and name voices and people. So for me, Ella Baker is one of those that like resonates for me. And of course, Fannie Lou Hamer, sick and tired of being sick and tired. Like all of that is true. And when you mention the Panthers, I have got to lift up the original rainbow of Fred Hampton, who brought together the Black Panthers and the Young Lords, Puerto Rican and Chicano organizers, and if y'all didn't know this, also the Young Patriots, white hillbillies living in Chicago who had come up from Appalachia. And Joshua, these folks were wearing Confederate flags originally on their denim, right? And Fred Hampton was once asked, because there are photographs of it, and Fred Hampton was once asked, how are you going to be there with these people? And Fred said, listen, and he was talking specifically about Hy Thurman, who I personally know. He's an elder now, of course. But he said, I know Hy. He is a good human. He's a good fella. He is confused, but he is trying to find a way to express himself. And I know who he is, and he's going to get past that. But I also know that the boss man and the cops are beating his ass and got the boot on his neck. Hy is with me, and I am with Hy. And it just makes me remember the ability to see the compassion and the connectedness, to be willing to name white supremacy and capitalism and heteropatriarchy, but to do it with love. Right? Like back the way you first started this thing, y'all. Like, we got to be truth tellers. We got to be fierce truth tellers. We got to talk about white supremacy and the need to dismantle it, just like we have to talk about capitalism. And at the end of the day, the thing that I love about the Labor Network for Sustainability and all the different work y'all do is the ability to break it down without dumbing it down. You're not just doing, rhetoric. You're actually building relationships with workers across race and across gender, and building that kind of world for a just transition. And I do want to circle back, just in case folks are not familiar with the just transition framework, Joshua. Why don't you break down what is a just transition framework, and why is it that the Labor Network for Sustainability has embraced that in such a full-throttled way?
I'm grateful. I'm learning that the framework of a just transition is for some very difficult, because there's just kind of the vice grip, the death grip on what is the old and what's been working. And from Tony Mazzocchi and the oil workers, comes this notion that we can transition away from extractive industry and use, in my base level understanding, utilize the infrastructures to start to create a more sustainable world. And that has to happen, one, by making clear provisions for the workers that have worked in these industries, to make sure that they can essentially bow out of the extractive industry with enough cushion by which they can have a clear understanding and clear notion to create the new sustainable. Um, and it's I've listened to a lot of stories. Um, one out of Appalachian coal miners of whose the entire township were workers in the coal mine. Um, and this looks a little different than the race to the south manufacturing nowadays, and I'll hope to touch on that. But these entire townships are built for the coal mine, for
Mhm.
and folks great grandpappies worked in those coal mines, and they saw themselves working in those mines because that was the best salary around those parts. That was the best living. Um, and folks could visibly see the deterioration of their loved ones from black lung disease, from all various types of cancer, from all these illnesses. But still, the trade off was like, listen, I'm going to die anyway. I'm going to need to make this salary, make this living for my family. The idea, the granular idea of a just transition is that folks should be able to have the imagination to say that we can leave that, we can move away from it and safely move into something else and define that. And so that is base level for me and for LNS how we're trying to articulate just transition. Again, I mentioned Norman over at the steel workers as folks are facing California's phase out from the industry, phase out from oil and gas, and folks are still scratching their heads of, well, what the hell am I to do? What is to be done? How am I going to feed my family? How am I going to maintain my communities? And so we need to actualize the just transition. We need to actualize these resources. And then we have to, and all of that is done with, instead of lining corporations' pockets, lining the pockets of the workers by which they can know that they have some safety net, some cushion in order to make an accurate transition.
Let me
And I
ask you a
love that,
question.
Joshua. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious because, you mentioned, you've heard these stories, and I've heard the same stories. Like the coal miner story is the same old knock. And one of the things that I recall years ago being proposed was a level of either community funded, community based, or local political, geopolitical creation of a sense of like almost like a re-education
Mhm.
program. And once that was proposed, there were a lot of people who were oppositional to the idea. Is that where, is that even part of the process anymore? Because it seemed like a good idea to me. I always thought like, okay, your industry is dying, and
Mhm.
because you're working with a resource that is finite. And if
Mhm.
you are going to take the skills that you learned doing job A, transitioning to job B, there got to be something added to it. It's not just taking what you know and sliding it over to something that's sustainable entirely. Is education woven into part of that transition, and what does that look like?
So I think the best folk to answer that um, is Jose Bravo and others over at the Just Transition Alliance who have committed to one educating on the finance work of a just transition,
Mhm.
educating on where the campaigns are that we can actualize that transition. And yes, people are building in, baking in the education component. That's a part of as we get to the cliff, understanding that there's steps down because we don't want folks to jump off the cliff. We want folks to safely step into it. Those education components, those funding components, as the industries, those dying industries are dying. Those industries like oil and gas are being phased out in other spaces. There has to be a funding component and there has to be an education component. Those components need to be baked in. There are great examples. The state of Colorado has a built-in office of just transition that was established through the AFL-CIO 2 years ago,
Wait a
L&S.
minute, hold on, Joshua. Like you just, I had no idea about this. Could you back up just a second? Because that's a big deal. Like
That is a big deal. And 2 years ago, L&S had the opportunity to be in Denver, and we did a small convergence on Colorado's just transition, and we learned lessons from both the labor component, which Dennis Daughtry is and I'm sometimes murder his name, but I'm a I'm a Mississippi Louisianan, so we get real French Spanish around here, but Dennis Daughtry, and he's the chair of the State Labor Council AFL-CIO in the state of Colorado. They have a built-in office on the state level of just transition, still in some of its early inclinations, but still working. And the first thing when when I've had a few meetings with Dennis, he echoed that it wasn't labor alone. It was labor and the Greens. It was labor and EJ. It was labor and CJ, and it was labor and community folk who actually established this office. And so that education component that you mentioned, Sean, has to prioritize, I feel, the all encompassing. It has to prioritize the community. It has to prioritize, because where are folks going to go? What are folks going to do? It has to prioritize not only, the existing skill set, but fostering, as you mentioned, a new skill set. Or are these skill sets able to be transferred to a new position, like articulating and building all of that. And so it's I guess it's needless to say that the world of a just transition is vast, and we need folks working on every level, even at the micro level. David, I see your Cooperation Jackson shirt. For folks who do know, I was at once program director over at Cooperation Jackson, and even Cooperation Jackson has a revolutionary just transition framework to move folks who within the state of Mississippi, for instance. If folks are familiar with how Nissan got to Mississippi in the year 2000, well, started in 98, the announcement that Nissan was going to happen. 30 years was the contract. So they had a 30-year contract, which they are coming to the end of that 30-year contract in the next couple of years. The state of Mississippi trained Nissan's first set of employees. Now, these big construction companies and stuff caught hold that, like they were going to phase out the full-time employees into temp staff. So they started setting up these temp agencies and stuff like that. But, precarious labor and white capitalists in the state of Mississippi, I tell you. And so all of that has transpired. And now you have a phasing out of this large manufacturing facility, and folks with a skill set, but it may not be a factory there for them in the next couple of years. So what are you going to do? How can you build the resting place, or how can you build the transition place? How can you empower folks to be like, all right, now I got these, I can build trim chassis. Does this mean that I can transition into new automotive body work or things like that? But also, while we have this large factory here, there will be the onset of EV and battery plants and things like that. And so how do we really articulate what will come next? Just transition has so much to do with the imagination of the future and the imagination of the worker that we have to stay colorful in it, I believe.
I'm glad you mentioned the Nissan plant, because I remember distinctly having friends in high school, because it was pre-98. I remember in 95 and 96 when that was starting in Northeast Mississippi, where they began training workers for that factory, one of which happened to be a good friend of mine that's still working there today. dropped out of high school to go. And yeah, I mean, I think he thinks he's going to retire, and he may be right, but I'm not going to hold my breath for that for him. But it's a decision a lot of folks are going to be facing.
Yeah, it is a decision.
Oh,
I know great workers at Nissan that have spent long careers there, and without the power of the union, how do you protect the pension?
no,
Yeah.
you can't, right? Let's be clear about that. And looky
Yeah.
here, Josh, you and I are friends, right? But ABO, always be organizing. So I'm gonna ask you in front of what will be thousands of people who watch this, brother, will you give me an introduction to somebody over at the Colorado Office of Just Transition? Because I'm thinking to be heading into Denver for some May Day events, and I would love to get a warm introduction from you to the folk over there.
So there is the CWRU coalition, and now you're gonna make me open up my my laptop. But I'll give you an introduction to that coalition that's working on like all of their state legislation, as well as Dennis Doherty himself.
Oh, you're the best, Josh. And the other thing is, man, this conversation is flying. We only got 9 minutes left in the show, so I do want to give an opportunity for you, Joshua, to talk about in what way, in what manner, and to what extent the Labor Network for Sustainability is participating in some of the calls for work stoppages, like because again, y'all occupy a very unique role, and I didn't want to just do that, but I would be remiss if I did not ask you about that.
I appreciate that. We do occupy this really unique niche, which I again articulate as relationship work, but as well as we do a lot of pulling and pushing, pulling folks into this dynamic, pushing folks where there can be more urgency. What we're supporting with all of these call to actions, and there are multiple. The Mayday Strong Coalition out of the CTU, and the
Chicago Teachers Union.
Yeah, the Chicago Teachers Union, and supporting the leadership of Stacey Davis Gates, and Jackson Potter. Jeremy Brecker will be on an upcoming podcast on around his work on social strikes, and Jeremy is working an angle. I was talking about it today. He's really culminating all of this social movement and bringing it back into the necessity of labor and EJ to work lockstep and hand in hand in this moment. And so then also the coalition of ending fossil fuels out of the Center for Biological Diversity is also working on some upcoming actions. And then we are supporting the call for a general strike out of Sean Fain's office in the UAW, and really trying to really get some traction there. So all of the fronts we're trying to be, we're a bit smaller than what we used to be, but still we're trying to show up on those multiple fronts to continue to pull folks together as well. A few months ago, we had an opportunity to co-host and support the movement for Black Lives, asking the question, "What the hell is Black labor to do?" And so that was a really good conversation as well. So just so we are on multiple fronts, really trying to be a center pivot by which people can enter in and kind of spin out into the various nodes of movement that are on the horizon.
I love that, right? Like an ecosystem amplifier and connector. So, Joshua, for Redneck Gone Green viewers and listeners, remember there'll be thousands of people who will end up having watched this video, right? So, my question to you, to put it really plainly and simply, if somebody is listening to your voice on the podcast or watching this on video, where can they get plugged in to be part of this growing movement for work strikes, for general strikes, to actually bring this empire to its knees, which is, I think, what needs to be done. At the end of the day, the idea that we just wait till an election cycle to act is just foolish.
Yeah, I think that not only is that foolish, as antiquated, and ultimately a tool of the capitalist machine by which we are trying to attack. And then not to say that listen, I go vote every year. Well, partly because my grandmother was born in 1923, she couldn't. So I mean, so I participate, and then also I participate in local elections because Kwame Ture says it best in the opening of Black Power, the Politics of Liberation. All politics happens locally. So we can talk about all this stuff on the federal level, and it don't mean a hill of beans to John Horn being the mayor in Jackson, and we having to struggle there. And so, but the clarion call I'll first offer is please visit our website, laborforsustainability.org. Labor, LABOR, the number 4, sustainability. That's a really big word, and don't pay me to spell. .org. Laborforsustainability.org. Pay attention to our newsletter month by month. We amplify and support our network, folks from across our network. This past newsletter, we had the opportunity to amplify Katie Chavez, as they are the ED for the Climate Justice Alliance, and supporting the multitude of work that is held by that member alliance, as well as amplifying other work, amplifying the principles of a just transition, working to bring EJ and labor more closely together. We've partnered with spaces like the Chisholm Legacy Project, Taproot Earth, the Just Transition Alliance, to have in real time a conversation of folks within labor and within EJ, and really establish a greater relationship. So we are on the cusp of moving that and moving that into the right direction, returning to our convergence process, which took a hit last year, but we're going to return to that process in the near future. Maybe reimagining how we do that, maybe working small to work larger. But yeah, we have a lot of things on the horizon, and we're still constantly building and working, and we're grateful for the support of all of y'all.
Well, thank you, Joshua. Looky here. Again, ABO, always be organizing. I will say it would be interesting to see about getting the Labor Network for Sustainability to join us in the fall at Resist and Build if y'all nested what y'all are doing there. We already have the International Association for the Study of the Commons involved. We've got the Basic Income Movement doing the same thing. And I know you got a little taste of that magic of the U.S. Social Forum, right? And
Yeah.
Detroit and Atlanta, like converging together and building together. And Joshua, like any chance I get to hang out with you is always a good day for me. So I just want to say, I'm going to plant that little seed that it would be good to get LNS in Denver in the fall.
We'll look to be there.
All right. Well, looky here. I want to thank again Joshua Dedmond, our guest here for the Labor Network for Sustainability, for joining us. Please do sign up on their newsletter. I am a subscriber to their newsletter. Part of the reason why I seem like I'm so smart is because I subscribe to newsletters like Labor Network for Sustainability and a host of others. And this is how we actually get ourselves informed, because if we are not aware, we cannot move strategically. So again, thank you, Joshua. I want to thank Shane Knight and the good folks over at the Democracy at Work who are giving us this opportunity to bring this forward. I want to thank Ruthie Engelke, who is the behind the scenes, my wife and partner, who makes this whole thing go. But more importantly, y'all, I want to thank you. I mean, you, the viewer, you, the listener, you, the member of Redneck Gone Green. We are getting larger, stronger, and better organized because of you. And again, this ain't the only place for it, but there is an ecosystem of resistance. There is an ecosystem of liberation, and you got to get in where you fit in. So join us next week, where our guest will be Ajamu Baraka of the Black Alliance for Peace. So Joshua, you set a high bar for Ajamu. I'm gonna let him know. And I want to thank you again and thank everybody else. Peace.